Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our PKF O'Connor Davies 2023 Not-for-Profit Executive Forum. We thank you for joining us. We've got 300 or so participants, but as you can see, most of them are joining us online on this chilly morning, but happy for those who are in attendance today. We've got a little bit of traffic problems. We've got some delays, but we're going to switch things around during our presentation, as you'll see. So all the presentations will be here just a little bit out of the order that we were originally presenting them to you. My name is Mark Pisco. I'm the not-for-profit practice leader here with the firm, and I'll be your host as well as your moderator. We've got a great program here for you today, one that will provide you with information that is not only current, but forward-looking into 2024 and 2025. Joining me are a group of subject matter experts who will inform and entertain. Yes, I did say entertain, so pressure's on, guys, entertain. Okay, so we'll start things off today with an ERC session. There were lots of bells and whistles going off, lots of alarms when the IRS issued this moratorium just a little while ago about payments and perhaps the suspension of payments till a future date. So everyone got a little nervous. We're going to explain all that to you in plain English. From there, we'll move on to a topic that's been all over the news lately, artificial intelligence. What is it? How will it affect things that are currently done? And how will AI affect the security of your information technology? We'll discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then we'll hear from our exempt tax group leaders about numerous changes and updates the IRS has made or is planning to make for exempt organizations. And compliance is always the focal point. And lastly, we'll do a legal update from our special guest speaker who's on our way to ensure you are familiar with legal and procedural changes that may impact your organization. If you have questions, please, we'll try to get to those during the presentation. For those online, submit your questions. If we don't get to those questions during this presentation, then we'll get to them at a future date. But we'll have all your questions, so rest assured we'll get to those. Okay, so our first speaker, I'd like to introduce Alicia Brestovinsky. She's a senior tax manager and a member of our firm's ERTC team. In this session, Alicia will demystify the ERTC, and in plain English, separate fact from fiction and explain how the credit is still available to those who are eligible. Alicia, you've got 25 minutes to get through this, so good luck and welcome, Alicia.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark, for the introduction. So now let's get into the ERC. Figure out how to move the slides here. Thank you. All right, so we're going to first start off with just an introduction to the ERC, right? So the biggest thing is why we're covering this topic now. Okay, the ERC, it's still a very hot topic, even though the CARES Act, started with the ERC back in 2020. Okay, but the IRS, as Mark had just mentioned, recently paused processing of new claims through at least the end of December. Okay, now we just want to reiterate here, the ERC is not over. The law has not been repealed, and the IRS will still have a responsibility to process those tax returns received before the amended return deadline. Okay, so right now you may have ERC receivables sitting on your balance sheet. Well, don't worry about those as long as the ERC is a legitimate claim. Those receivables, they're still legitimate and they should still exist. No allowances needed. And then, one of these other questions you may have is, what do I do if you're no longer sure that you qualify? I'm going to be covering that just a little bit later when we talk about the IRS's new rules for withdrawal procedures. And then just a date to keep in mind is statute of limitations. Okay, these filing deadlines are approaching. You have until April 15th of 2024, which is quickly coming up for 2020 quarter claims for ERC, and then April 15th to 2025 for 2021 quarters. Okay, so next, I'm just going to cover just a little background on the employee retention credits. So what are they in the first place, right? So it's a refundable payroll tax credit established by the CARES Act. It was used by a few businesses in 2020 because its use was prohibited for those receiving PPP loans. Later legislative acts removed that prohibition for PPP borrowers, hence the increase of ERC claims. Okay. And then legislation also extended and expanded the ERC through Q3 of 2021. Now, there are also what's called recovery startup businesses. These businesses must have started after February 15th, 2020, and they're eligible through Q4 of 2021. And then the last question here on the background is, how does a business claim the ERC? The only way that the ERC can be claimed as of currently is through filing an amended payroll tax form called the 941X. So as a result of the IRS moratorium on the pausing of claims, you may have heard about promoters telling organizations that they qualify with very aggressive positions. Okay, they typically take large percentages of the ERC credits. They're typically 20 to 30% of an inflated credit that they happen to calculate. Okay, I've personally seen these. I've seen credits of over $1 million, and the fee that they charge is like $200,000. It's not fun. Okay, they typically use tactics like your business may be eligible for up to $20,000 per employee. This isn't Oprah show where everybody gets $26,000. Okay, it doesn't work like that, and that's your best case scenario. Okay, so moving on to deadlines and current events. So as I noted before, the IRS paused processing new ERC claims. It was as of September 14th. Okay, so the IRS is only stopping the process of new payroll tax returns with the ERC claims. Anything that was already in process that they received isn't going to be paused. They're going to keep on processing those. Okay, and it's really only going to slow the processing of claims. Which, just a side note, okay, it doesn't change the deadline for the amended returns. It just slows the process. Now, historically, we've seen processing of ERC claims take 6 to 9 months, maybe more, depending on the amount of claim. Any claims over $100,000 typically take a lot more time to process. We've seen processing times upwards of 12 months or more, depending on how much it is. So as a result of these unscrupulous promoters that I previously mentioned, the IRS believes that up to 95% of ERC claims may be ineligible and honestly could be fraudulent. Okay. So the IRS concern here is really about small businesses. They're being charged contingent fees and being taken advantage of these promoters. So hence the IRS initiated the pause. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, there is a new ERC withdrawal program, and that's as of October 19th. It's a new program here, relatively easy to navigate. Okay, there are certain employers that can use this withdrawal program right off the bat. So if these employers made a claim on an amended payroll tax form, the 941X, and they filed the amended return only to claim the ERC, they can't have made any other changes on their 941X. They want to withdraw the entire amount of their ERC claim. And the IRS has either not paid the claim, or the IRS has paid the claim, but the employer hasn't cashed or deposited the check. Okay, the employer can use the withdrawal program. Okay, and taxpayers under audit can still withdraw their claims. So good news there. And then there's going to be a different program available for those employers who are expected, who have already cashed those checks. So great news there. So takeaways here: if you file a legitimate claim, don't be concerned. Okay, and the biggest thing here that the IRS wants everyone to know: make sure you're using a trusted tax professional to, calculate your ERC, determine your qualification, which I'll get into a little bit later, and to also provide you with well-documented and supportable eligibility work papers. Okay, again, this should not affect the eventual collectability of ERC receivables, so there's no need for an allowance. However, just want to make a note here, if you did not work with a trusted tax professional, now is the time to review your eligibility and credit calculations with a trusted advisor. It may come up on audit if the amount's material. Okay, identifying and withdrawing an improper claim can provide significant savings, especially in penalties and interest. Okay, and I just want to add, PKF O'Connor Davies does have an ERC team of professionals that not only determines eligibility, but also does ERC calculations. We can assist with withdrawal if that's the way to go. And then we also assist with IRS audit defense should you have an audit related to the ERC. Now, moving on to eligibility. Okay, so first thing with the ERC is you need to be eligible. Okay, so there's really two prongs of qualification here. So your operations were fully or partially suspended based on government orders. Okay, your business no longer qualifies when that order is lifted. So for example, in New York, many schools no longer qualified after being allowed to open in September of 2020. Okay, and then a business may have also experienced a significant decline in gross receipts for a calendar quarter, which is compared to calendar quarters in 2019. So a 20% decline is required for 2021 eligibility. Okay, and then a 50% decline in 2020 to start qualification. And then the last quarter of eligibility is when a business has a decline of less than 20%. So going further into government orders. So if a business was deemed essential and had no restrictions placed on it, they can only qualify if a government order shut down its suppliers. And I'll get a little bit more into detail later about the shutdown of suppliers. Okay. If a government order closes an employer's workplace, there are some rules and regulations we have to consider here. Like, were you able to transition to telework effectively and thus weren't able to truly shut down by the order? Okay, so other factors, employers' telework capabilities. Do the employer have adequate support, IT and otherwise, to support telework? Were your employees' work portable? Okay, how much of that work can be performed remotely? Was there a need for presence in the employee's physical workspace? So how essential is the physical space to what the employer does? And then transitioning to network operations. If the employer did not previously allow telework, was there a significant transition period? Okay. So if a government order closes a non-essential part of the business, but some part of that business is essential. So for example, a hospital, if they can't perform elective surgeries, okay, we're looking more into the gray area here and looking at partial shutdowns. So we would need to determine if those restrictions have an effect on operations, which is more than nominal and thus constitute a partial shutdown. Okay. Now, if this were to exist, there has to have a reduction of gross receipts or hours worked by 10% or more. Okay. If the government order allows the use of workspace with restrictions, so for example, a nursing home with capacity restrictions, these restrictions have to reduce the employer's ability to provide goods and services in the normal course of business by at least 10%. So here with the nominal test in this gray area, you're really looking at a 10% impact. So which orders qualify? Okay, so just want to reiterate, all organizations do not qualify for ERC. Okay, every organization is different. Do general stay-at-home orders qualify an organization? No, they don't. Do CDC and OSHA guidelines qualify an organization? No, they don't. And in fact, within, I believe it was the last 2 weeks, the IRS actually put out a memo or notification stating specifically that OSHA guidelines do not qualify. Do restrictions that limited demand for services qualify an organization? No, they don't. Just because, demand for services decreased does not mean organizations qualify. Do issues with the supply chain qualify a business? No, and I'm going to discuss that just a little bit further. Now I'm going to move on to the gross receipts test, which this was the second prong of test in the qualification for ERC. So if you're using the gross receipts test for 2021, a business must qualify for each quarter receipt to take credit. Okay, qualification is based on declining gross receipts, either for the current quarter or the immediately preceding quarter. So to qualify in the first quarter of 2021, a business would need a 20% decline in gross receipts when either comparing the first quarter of 2021 to Q1 of 2019 or the preceding quarter, fourth quarter 2020 compared to Q4 of 2019. Thus, a decline in Q1 or Q2 of 2021 can lead to eligibility in multiple quarters. Okay, something to note here, if there are separate entities owned by the same group, okay, you have to consider the gross receipts decline across related entities, across that entire group. Okay. A further note on gross receipts, the gross receipts need to follow the tax return. So for not-for-profit, that means grant income on an accrual basis, on a quarter-by-quarter comparison, and also gross sales of security on a quarter-by-quarter comparison as well. Okay, and again, a note about the related entities for not-for-profits. Okay, that could mean considering board overlap and related organizations on Schedule R of the Form 990. Okay, now we're going to move into calculating the ERC next. So for 2020, the ERC is 50% of an employee's qualified wages. The maximum qualified wages are $10,000 per employee for the year. Okay, so your maximum credit per employee is $5,000 for the entire year. Now, in 2021, the rules changed. So you're looking at 70% of an employee's qualified wages for 2021 quarters. The maximum qualified wages are still $10,000 per employee, but that's per quarter. So your maximum credit per employee is $7,000 per quarter, totaling $21,000 for the 3 quarters of 2021. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the recovery startup businesses can also claim up to $7,000 per employee in Q4 of 2021. So moving on to eligibility requirements with a number of employees. So there is a bit of a restriction on the ERC based on the number of employees. Okay, now this number of employees is based on a 2019 average of monthly full-time employees that work over 30 hours. Okay, so that means that your raw employee totals have to be vetted, especially for seasonal employers. So for 2020, if there were less than 100 employees, the credit applies to all employees. If there were more than 100 employees, the credit only applies to employees not providing services. Okay, in 2021, the rules are the same, except your threshold is 500 employees. So moving on to PPP interaction. So there's no double dipping here. Okay, wages used for PPP forgiveness cannot also be used for the ERC. Okay. So many businesses filed forgiveness applications before the ERC became available to them. So what if you had a business that had a $100,000 PPP loan, but claimed $200,000 in wages on the PPP forgiveness application? Can you use any of those wages for the ERC? Yes, you can. So wages in excess of the amount required for full forgiveness can be used for the ERC, even if they were in the PPP covered period and listed on the application. Okay. So what if a business had allowable non-PPP expenses here? So say there was $40,000 of rent expense. So if those were claimed on the PPP forgiveness application, they reduce the amount of wages needed for PPP forgiveness. So thus in this example, $140,000 of wages would be available for ERC. And we get that by taking the $200,000 in wages less the $60,000 of wages used for PPP forgiveness. So moving on to supply chain disruptions. So on July 21st, the IRS issued a memo to provide further clarification on supply chain disruptions with 5 specific examples on eligibility for ERC. Okay, I've included these examples on the slides. I really want to focus on the one example where the IRS did find that the employer was eligible here. So under example 3, both the employer and the supplier had government orders suspending both their business operations for April of 2020. The orders were lifted in May of 2020. However, the employer had a delay in receiving critical goods from the supplier for the remainder of 2020 and 2021. The supplier did not provide a reason for the delay. With this example, and this is the only example where the IRS found that the employer was eligible. It was eligible for April of 2020 only. Okay. In any of the other examples, the IRS did not find them eligible. So why was that? Now the reason is both entities, both the employer and the supplier, had physical proof that there was a government order shutting them down. Without proof of shutdown, there's no qualification. The IRS made that clear with these examples. The business must have stopped or significantly limited its operations because it was unable to obtain critical goods from a supplier or from an alternate. Okay. Residual delays after lifting a government order don't qualify. Qualification is only permitted during the period in which the government order exists. And experiencing higher costs for critical goods does not mean a business experienced a full or partial shutdown of operations. Okay. That's all I have. I'll take any questions if the audience has any.
Actually, we do have some questions, Alicia. So both online and, well, I guess mostly online. So the first being, can nonprofit organizations that do not file a Form 990, for example, churches, do they get the ERC? Or can they?
Yes, they can still qualify. So a lot of churches still pay payroll, which is what the ERC is based on. So they would still go through the same eligibility tests, and then ERC can be determined from there.
Okay, here's another one. For the gross receipts test, the comparison is Q1 2021 to Q1 2020, not Q1 2021 to Q1 2019, correct?
So a Q1 of 2021, your comparison period, you have 2 comparison periods. Okay, you can either compare Q1 to Q1 of 2019, or you're looking at Q4 of 2020. Q4 of 2020, if you have a decline of at least 20%, that would qualify you for Q1 of 2021.
Okay, here's a crystal ball question, I guess. Once a claim is filed with the IRS, how long does the organization have to wait for refund checks?
Right. So as I mentioned before, processing times can take, well, before the moratorium, it takes 6 to 9 months, if not more, depending on the claim. There was an additional processing queue period for claims over 100,000. So, you may see upwards of a year before you actually get the funds.
Okay, there's a customized one. It says, what does PKFOD's process look like for ERC determination?
Right. So our ERC team would meet with interested employers, and just chat about your business operations. And then we would review information to determine ERC eligibility based on government orders, how the business was affected, and then also look at declining gross receipts. And then we would move on from there.
Okay, just one more, Alicia. What gross receipts categories are considered with the eligibility determination for NFP organizations?
Right. So this is a good question. As I mentioned before in the presentation, we consider grant income on a quarter-by-quarter comparison, and also gross receipts of sales of securities. But we also consider anything that's considered revenue on the Form 990. Okay, that may include program revenue, other contributions, dues, rental income, any of those categories we would need to consider for the decline in gross receipts on a quarter-by-quarter comparison.
I think that does it for the questions. Alicia, thank you. That was very informative. I'll get on the podium right now. So as I said, we are switching things around just a bit. So our next presenter is going to be Suma Chander. And Suma is the lead partner of our technology and consulting advisory group. She'll discuss the history of AI, what it is, how it benefits our work processes, and how it continues to encroach on our daily lives. She'll also discuss the cybersecurity challenges the expanding use of AI can cause. Suma, take it away. Suma, are you for real, or are you just an image? I'm gonna make sure you're real.
Thank you, Mark. I'm happy to be here talking about what everybody wants to hear these days, but I'm sure all of you are reading a lot about artificial intelligence, the technology, the advancements, the speed of innovation, as well as how it's really impacting everybody, young to old, all across the sectors in every single way possible. So I would like to just kind of start. Am I going back? Okay, sorry. I would like to actually ask everybody in the room and whoever's online that I can't see, have all of you started experimenting with the tools that are available outside? And what have you seen? What are your experiences like? I'm sure everybody heard about generative AI. Yes?
Inquiries from clients who use technologies like ChatGPT to draft preliminary versions of agreements that they want our review around. And I will suggest that organizations not do that. It does not cut down on the legal work involved.
Okay. That's good to know.
I've been working with a nonprofit that's focusing on these large language models and the significant inaccuracy and bias that's produced. And so it's been, we're doing some testing, some beta testing of ways that the public can begin to develop a baseline and do some of that testing. But it's been very sobering how these are being used as a single source of truth.
So you're actually training a local, a model.
Well, yeah, we're working on building a model, in this case, a public forum for testing election around the election's accuracy and bias and being able to build a baseline. But it's just really trying to promote to the larger world more clarity around the lack of trustworthiness
Okay.
Of what you find.
So you're really trying to show the audience the biases around what an AI algorithm can pretty much produce if the data is not accurate. Okay, that's a very good point to start with, actually. Anyone else? Anything else? Okay, so I'll just give you, I know everybody knows what artificial intelligence is, but it's not new. It started in 1959 in Dartmouth, actually. It started in Dartmouth, and I just put it in the slide before if anybody's interested. There's a little story on how it started. A few technologists over there decided they want a computer to kind of learn how to think like a human. And that's really a lot of the what programming was, pretty much feed in technology around if-then loops and come up with an output on what it should be giving a whole bunch of conditions that the computer should be thinking about. And so it's not new for all of us, but over time, what happened was the traditional artificial intelligence of what was just programming, and it was also sped up in terms of innovation and what it can do. And some of the deepest innovation and the speed of innovation happened around what we call deep learning. What is machine learning? Machine learning is, I'll just give you a little bit of a technical background if you're interested, if anybody feels like, I just think that it's all very good for all of us to kind of have a high level understanding of what artificial intelligence is in a very simple way, because it is in our lives. It is an imperative for most corporations and organizations to adopt it. And it's important that all of us learn and understand so that we understand also what the hypes are and what the reality is. And what we should be doing and not doing. So that's why I put together a few slides just to give you a very high level educational understanding of what this is really. Machine learning is really a set of algorithms, mostly done in mathematics. It's also very old. It's a way for really, we write human language, we speak human language. How does the machine really understand, take this information and translate it into the binary? And it could be images, it could be now video streams, it could be audio streams, it could be just text. So that understanding is all happening in mathematical formula, and that's a part of machine learning. That is machine learning. So how did the speed of innovation, why did it all become so fast in the last 8 to 10 years? The shift happened in deep learning. What is deep learning? Basically, what we have two types of data that the computer understands. We have something called unstructured data, and we have something called structured data. Structured data is simple things like text, text and binaries, numbers, things like that. But what about audio, video? So it's able to now perceive this, and it's able to now understand it and analyze it in the binary form that it's supposed to understand, a machine is supposed to understand, translate it and analyze it. So that's where the innovation really happened. And most of that happens in machine learning. So initially, a lot of what was happening as a part of machine learning was a lot of heavy manual human intervention that was involved in terms of modeling it and making sure it takes the input and can give an output. But then they came up with algorithms where this was automated. It could take multiple audio files, it could take multiple video files, it could take images, and it could quickly translate into, analyze it and understand in a very easy way. That's a lot of that started happening. That's deep learning, where you could take unstructured and structured data, analyze it, and give it in an output in a format that we understand in text. So that's why the speed just immediately picked up. Once they cracked that puzzle on the heavy learning of machine learning that was taken out, everything became very fast in terms of innovation. So that's what's deep learning. And also, how does deep learning really work? That's a part of what neural networks is. Neural network is pretty much how a human brain is wired. They try to replicate and come up with permutations and combinations of how things work, and it's a part of deep learning. So, and then that's a big shift that happened in AI. And then everybody knows the synonym for generative AI, which is ChatGPT, which is one of the largest large language models that OpenAI has come up with, and it has really taken off in a big way. Generative AI is nothing but it's pretty much, I think it's, everybody's using ChatGPT. If you're not really using it, you've played with it, you know what it is. So I'll go a little bit into that. So I just put, basically, these are the components of AI. AI is not just, it's a component of all of this. It's machine learning, it's deep learning, and it's generative AI. They're not all, they're all a part of AI. So I just put that as a diagram. I just wanted to give you a very quick overview on how generative AI works in a very simple manner. Think of ChatGPT. It's a transformer. They call it a processing transformer, right? What is it? What is it really doing? It takes, what are they doing? They're feeding it large amounts of data, huge amounts of data. And then you look through patterns in the data, for example, take, for example, language, Latin or Sanskrit or English. You're feeding the computer all this language, and now it looks at the patterns of what is a verb, what is a noun, what if you feed this, what comes next. It's going to look through all this data and it's going to analyze. So how does generative AI really work? For example, you type into generative AI a sentence called "the dog is." It's going to look through all the data that it has, and it'll see the highest probability of what the output could be based on what it already has. So if the output could be, if there is a word somewhere it read that is barking or running or a rider, it'll quickly recognize that the most probable thing in this situation, the dog is not a rider. The dog is potentially barking. So it understands that based on a lot of the patterns from what it's already been fed, and it gives you that as an output. So I just kind of put that here. So, and then it goes on a iterative loop. It keeps doing that. So basically this sentence, it starts forming the sentence one by one. It starts looking at the probability of what the next word is based on what it's seeing. So the sentence is then fed back into the chat transformer, and based on the probability of the next word, it generates the output. So it's like a continuous loop that happens. So coming back to what she has said in terms of the models and the biases, what they're trying to do, they're training this, when you say training these models, they're making sure that they are getting what they want, they're giving the data that they need for it to produce the right output that they need and how they want it. So this is really a very simple way of saying what it means to really train the data. So this is, I just put again how the whole feedback loop here works in the transformer, so that you kind of get an understanding on how these large language models work in a very simple way. This is a very simple way. So then the next, what I put here is about prompt engineering. What is prompt engineering? This is becoming a new thing. ChatGPT gives any large language model gives you what you give, what you feed in is what you feed out, get out of the model. So coming back to how the large language model works, it's, say you give a whole bunch of crappy data that's not relevant. It's not relevant to you, or it's not relevant to what you want. It's going to look through these models and it's going to look through the data that you have fed it, but it's going to give you bad output because it doesn't know what to look for. So that's why I think what she was saying there is they're trying to actually show people that it can create biases. PKF O'Connor Davies has been a part of the G20 Women's 20 Task Force as a part of implementing compliance and policies around artificial intelligence. I've been a part of that. And there have been a clear study that almost 30%, there's a gender bias in our AI algorithms. The reason there is a gender bias that's already crept into an AI algorithm is most women do not have access to technology, and they're not in a lot of the countries, not in the US, but across the world. And because of the less number of women using technology, they're not able to get enough data of what women do, what women like, what women look like many of these things. So if you are accessing an algorithm versus I'm accessing an algorithm, the output is very different, and it is biased towards a man. And that bias is already growing because there's lesser access to technology for women. I'm just giving this to you as an example because, again, it's collecting all this data from all these different sources. And if there is no comprehensive data that is governed properly for a certain algorithm to be trained, your responses from that algorithm are incorrect. So the governments, the United Nations, they're already on top, they're working on these, but they just don't know how to work with it because it's moving, the technology is moving so fast. But coming back to implementing any models or using a third-party model and customizing it for your own company, this is something that's very important for companies to understand, or a non-for-profit to understand, that your data set needs to be extremely comprehensive and it needs to be governed properly. Otherwise, your outputs are going to be either biased or you're not going to get what you want. So coming back to prompt engineering, there's a whole science around how you get your answers out of ChatGPT, how you get your answers back in a format you want, in a tone you want, in the context you want. And in the format you want, in ChatGPT. There are 2-year courses now that are happening, and it's called prompt engineering. So if you start playing with a large language model, there's a lot that can be done. And I really recommend studying to some extent how you want to use these large language models for you to get the information you want in the right formats. So coming back to AI in the non-for-profit sector, which is very relevant to you, the study shows that, of course, in terms of the applications of technology in this area, a lot of what I put on this slide here is being used by multiple industries, but this is more relevant to you, is in terms of understanding how your donor behavior is, and in terms of understanding where your demographics are, who are your donors, who have donated in the past. Like, if you're trying to analyze that, you take sets of all your donors from your past. For example, you can take the generic data sets from, say, New York City. You can kind of get a lot of that information on, say, net worths, or, what kind of people are interested in donating to your non-for-profit, or can become, say, a board, whatever you're looking for. A lot of the data can be, if you can get it, there are predictive analysis tools. These tools have been existing for a long time, but now they have artificial intelligence, a lot of artificial intelligence tools built into their technology, and they're able to give you a better, almost like a map of what you think your focus should be. Where do you think you should put your efforts into? This is where it's able to look back, it's able to predict, and is able to analyze and give you an output so that your efforts are focused on where you should be focusing. So such tools and it's able to make that assessment, and you're able to then make better use of your time and efforts. Similarly, the same thing kind of rolls into fundraising and resource allocation. You're able to then take your predictive analysis results, and you're able to allocate your resources on where you should be raising your money, what you should be putting your efforts into. One of the biggest automation around large language models is translation, automatic translation into different languages, which has made marketing and email communication or electronic communication easy in multiple languages. ChatGPT can talk in multiple languages. It can give you answers. You can also translate much easier using a lot of tools that are available out there. So if you have multiple demographics of people to reach internationally, it's become much easier without too much of an effort. So that's a very good efficiency that you could potentially supply. If you are working with process automation, with strategic initiatives, and how to reduce operational costs, again, we have mathematical models in that area. And also, recently we did actually, I was talking to the lending community, the commercial lending community, on a DEI inclusion for lending. Like, can AI help you with that? The response is it can. It depends on how you use it. How traditional lending, for example, you take the credit score of a person, and depending on the credit score of a person, you decide to make a loan or not. A bank can potentially do that. But because of a lot of the artificial data that's being collected, a person is able to kind of go and say, okay, the person does not have a credit score. But he still has had, paychecks from the last 2 years. These are the jobs he changed. They're able to kind of get a lot more data about the person that has nothing to do, that may still not have a credit score. And they're able to actually, if they want to make it more inclusive, and give the people an opportunity and take that risk. There's a lot more data that organizations are able to go after as a part of their DEI lending strategy, to be able to make it more inclusive and accessible for people with low income and who don't have credit scores, and et cetera. So it giving a lot more breadth and understanding to data, et cetera. So that's another big advantage. In terms of actual implementation of generative AI, Now, there's a lot of conversation about these large ChatGPT can be really, I've used it quite a bit, and I can see what it can do. It can do really good things as long as the data is, but it can also not do, it can also fail in very simple things. So if you can learn how to use it and really understand the data and the output, I would say you should try, you should use it. But having said that, there's a lot of concerns around cyber attacks, a lot of concerns around data exposure of your clients, your donor information. You know, is it public? If you put it out there, what's going to happen, etc. So I just put, I just put a few tools out there that I thought you may be interested to kind of absorb, that you could potentially use, that people are using in terms of automation in the area, like donor management platforms. There's a couple here that I cited, some chatbots, some content generative tools, of course, you know. What are the tools that are being used for cybersecurity to protect from AI exposure generally, and more, of course, and also some Salesforce is old, but it has come up with further AI automation within its own suite of applications. So I just put it out there for anybody who wants to explore any of these that could potentially be useful for you later. So I think we went through this. Any questions, any comments before I keep moving? I feel like I'm on a monologue. I'll continue. Is there anything you want to hear more, not hear more?
Government doing for AI, maybe police it a little, or we heard that there was an attack in the law firm that submitted a brief to the courts and actually used a lot of the AI, which came up with, you probably are aware, which came up with some, I'm going to say, fictitious court cases.
Yes, yes. That's absolutely true. You're right, and that has happened. Yeah, if you want to, yeah, just please.
So my question was, what is the government doing? I heard that they're trying to analyze the uses of AI.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I recently heard was that there was a law firm that submitted a brief to the courts that using AI that actually made up some fictitious court cases.
Right. So that's true. I've heard other stories like that as well. They're in the news a lot these days. Recently, the government, Joe Biden actually in the White House met with a whole bunch of tech leaders. I don't know if you're aware of the news, but he met all the top guys of Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, all the innovative leaders out there, and he's come up with a regulatory policy that they're trying to formulate, and they're trying to release it. Now, the whole thing is, we don't, like, if you really look through the regulation and policy, there's still a lot of movement in terms of the technology and the speed of growth. So is there going to be a regulation and an enforcement of AI regulation from the government? Yes, they're in the process of doing it. Is it really taken up by a governing body so that we are all following it? Not yet. There are no SEC rules, or there's no real regulation out there, but I think they're going to try to enforce some level of regulation. There's also a lot of conversation. There are bodies like Stanford Institute of Human-Centric Intelligence, the original innovators of artificial intelligence who came up with the original algorithms in Google actually left Google very long time ago, because the lady, her name is Timnit Gebru. If anybody's interested, Google her. She's kind of fascinating. She was one of the pioneers, and she left because she realized the power of artificial intelligence and what it can actually do. And if without the right ethics, and the right bias and the right control on biases and control and regulation, it can go haywire. It can, because these computers, you're teaching a computer how to think, but they don't have emotional intelligence like humans do. So it's can they hallucinate? And but when we say hallucinate, it's really true, because they're trying to think, they're trying to formulate themselves, and it could be flawed. And then they take action on it. It could be creating a bug, a malware. I was going to talk about that next. It can just create a bug on its own because, that's what it wants to do. So there are multiple things that can happen if it's not regulated. So I think it's going to come down the pipeline. But the issue is also the technology is growing at such a rapid pace. I see news every day on new things happening. So, which is what I was going to kind of go next. I just put so to answer your question, yes, there is initiative, but nothing down yet. But I think it's coming, and let's hope it's coming. Yes.
Thank you. So I'll be presenting at 10:20 on legal developments affecting the nonprofit sector. And one of the items I'll be talking about is actually a legal development around the use of AI here in New York City. Just this past year, City Council has enacted a law that regulates the use of AI in employment, in the employment context. So organizations that, as a matter of efficiency of process, use automated tools, AI tools, to sort through resumes that are submitted in connection with a job posting, now must conduct on an annual basis an audit to ensure that those AI tools are not inadvertently allowing evidence of bias in their review and selection process, and to post the results of those audits on the organization's website. So if you are a large organization that receives a massive number of applications for postings and you use some sort of artificial intelligence to sort through them, be aware that this is a significant new administrative obligation.
That's very informative. Thank you.
And sorry, just one other question as we're looking at bias and being able to hold accountable those who are have these tools. So we're putting these tools into the world. When you talk about Stanford and others, I think, I don't know if you can touch on this, but part of the challenge for the public and the nonprofit sector that is looking to, and the government sector that is looking to promote accountability, is a question of access to the amount of cloud computing and the actual ability to test means you need to have access to a tremendous amount of bandwidth that is all in the private sector. So it's really difficult even for our leading research and analysis people in the government and the nonprofit sector to be able to even to quantify and to analyze what's happening, because there is so little transparency and so little capability. So I don't know if you've come across any organizations that are trying to address that.
Well, they are. I think the what we call multimodal AI is now I'm sure you heard of that. You now have the capabilities to process data at such a tremendous speed. The next challenge that the technology itself is facing is speed. And that is why now they're looking towards, what do we do? Our computers, our cloud computing, our techniques, our technology is not able to keep up. It's moving towards what we call quantum computing. That is the next phase, because now Azure, like Microsoft Azure, already has developed just one, I don't really remember the name now, but they have certain type of computing that is focused on quantum computing that's not cloud. So you may want to look that up for Azure, but now a lot of the chips, a lot of the data, everything, how it's stored, the cloud is going to now fade, and it's going to be more quantum, because it's tremendous of amounts of data getting crunched and processed extremely fast, and the processors are now not able to handle it. So we are moving towards a new type of technology called quantum computing. So that's going to be worked in parallel with cloud computing and improved chips, et cetera, which is why NVIDIA, the chips NVIDIA, they've picked up huge, their stock prices are shooting up the roof because of this. So I think even OpenAI Sam Altman, he's focused more on now the hardware and the chips because he's realized software challenges are getting cracked very fast. How do we now handle and take advantage of the technologies that we have already developed? So I hope that helps, that answer. But just what she said, I actually have had that as an example here in Big Data and Biases. You can just kind of read through. I know I'm running out of time. So I'll just move through the next slide. I just kind of put some things out there and what are the things you should think about in terms of risks. Data collection, one of the very important things I will say is be careful with your data. How you model it, how you train it, make sure you have the right governance and privacy policies in place. If you are training data within your companies, your own models, you're building your own models, make sure that there's extra encryption on the data that you're working with, very strong security on who's working with your data. Because the minute you mess with your data, if anybody messes with your data, they can also introduce security risks coming down to, now you have AI. AI can also generate phishing, for example, is the biggest form of cyber attack. So AI can generate also emails that are closest to how a human can write. It can simulate so beautifully. So you are more prone to phishing. So that's what we call social engineering. So now think about the cyber policies and security technology out there was working with a human brain. Now we are working with computer against computer. That's what we should be thinking about in terms of cyber attacks. There are software out there to counter these AI generated malware. AI can also generate malware, like it can generate regular text. So there's systems and technologies that are being developed already that can counter AI generated malware. And your cybersecurity people that in your company should be aware of these things and policies and systems out there. So they're actually called ChatGPT fraud bots. So they're kind of an alternate name for that. So I would say be aware of this. I will just pass through. There's a little bit of more detail. There's a little video out here. I don't know if we can play it. We can't play it, but it's Morgan Freeman. It looks like Morgan Freeman. It's not Morgan Freeman. He does a little conversation to you, but there's something called deepfake. Basically, you're able to superimpose images. You're able to do videos like I'm someone else. So it's kind of, please be aware of these things that are happening in the industry. And also, when you're taking care of your cybersecurity, make sure all your data is properly encrypted. You have proper access controls within your company and within your applications. You have multi-factor authentication. It's extremely important. If you're training and keeping history of your past data, keep it maybe separate. If you need to keep it, don't mix it with your current data, just to kind of be safe. And just really understand that your data can be manipulated and poisoned, what they're calling poisoned. And the importance and the governance in not creating biases in the data sets that you're training. Otherwise, your algorithms are going to hallucinate. They're going to give you wrong results. They're going to say whatever you want them to say. If you're integrating third-party tools, please be aware that the third-party tools also have artificial intelligence little components that they're incorporating. Audit them, ask them the right questions, make sure that you're given full visibility into the models. And if you are adopting an external model, ask them for a full documentation and description of what the model does. It's called explanatory models. There are two types of models. If you don't ask, you're not going to get it. Ask that the model be fully explained. And if you have a technologist on site that can actually see what it really does and things like that, that's best, of course. So the key takeaways is really, and I'm running out of time, is I would say do not be afraid, embrace the change. This is it's an imperative. It's an imperative that we all have to embrace, and it's a very beautiful innovation that can really automate things. Goldman Sachs said that if you really use it, it can improve productivity by 66% and can have a 7% GDP growth overall. So, you know, of course, jobs will change, the kinds of jobs may change, but overall, it's a good thing if done well. Like if done well, that's important. Also, I think education is very important. Keep yourself up to date. It's not coming at some point, it's already here. And implement the necessary structures to mitigate the risk. Work with the right experts, get the right auditors, get the right technologists to continuously monitor your systems, your networks. We do that. We have been working with a lot of clients who ask us, how do we go about doing this? And we have been guiding our clients on how to implement these programs, what are the things they need to do to monitor these programs, and how can they do it safely. So there are companies out there doing it, including PKF. So please work with them and work with the right experts. So that's, yeah, I have some future points on takeaways, I think, Mark. Any other questions, any comments?
Suma, we had a nice discussion earlier. It's me back here, right? And you did have this presentation elsewhere, and someone raised a good question, and I think we chatted about it. I thought it was an interesting question, so I think it'd be good if you raise that here with this group and the folks online.
Yes, sure. So we talked to an investment bank recently, and they asked us, "What's your advice? We want to start working with AI across our firm. What's your advice?" So, and how do you go about doing it? We don't know where to start, where to end, right? So I said there are a couple of ways to go about doing this. Number one, if you have a company and you want to start implementing artificial intelligence, go to all your different functional areas of your company. Understand the use cases from each area. May that be marketing, fundraising, accounting. Understand your use cases. What does your day look like? What is it that can be automated? Collect all those use cases, then research or work with the experts on the field on what kinds of, do you want to build a model in-house? Are there models available outside that you can bring in and you can train? Are there tools outside that you can use that keep your organization safe and your data safe? I would say that's a starting place. And of course, along with that, there are work with, I would say, your security, key security and technologists to make sure your networks are safe and the models you're developing, you're getting the right data and it's encrypted. Of course, that's a part of the implementation. And make sure you understand that there's a resource that needs to be allocated to continuously monitor, audit, and upgrade these systems. And if you're embracing third-party tools, again, make sure that they give you all the documentation. The starting is developing a use case scenario for your company, understanding the technologies that can help you, integrating it, understanding if you want to buy it, you want to get it from an external source, make sure your data is protected, it's secure. And then once you roll out, post-rollout, understand what your exposure is, what your responsibilities are towards your donors and your own organization, and then go. I mean, that's pretty much quite simple. It's so that was our answer to them, and yeah, so they're working with us actually, kind of doing that.
Okay, great. I do have another question here online, and I think you may have touched on this, but they're asking, how reliable is the information that you use from AI-generated sources? How can you separate fact from fiction? Should I be using that information?
So I would say, if you ask ChatGPT, the data on ChatGPT as of now is, I think the last data that they have is April 2023. They've publicly, openly said that the data they have available in terms of going back and pulling it is as of April 2023. So generative AI models are not looking across the internet. They have large amounts of data that they have in a public domain or whatever they're looking at. Nobody really knows. There's no full disclosure in terms of getting the data. For example, the cat is sleeping, 4-letter word. If I ask ChatGPT, what is the 4th word in the cat is sleeping, it could not tell me that it's sleeping. It failed. So there are things it can do right. There are things it cannot do right. I have seen it. Like I've said, have I received any awards? It gave me, it received 4 awards. I've not received any awards, any of the awards it gave me. So the information that it can give can be flawed. So please verify it, especially if you're very specific about specific things, but also I'm aware that the training of the data is also happening at a very fast pace. So I would say it's quite accurate to a large extent, but there are mistakes. So please verify.
I think we've got time for one more, and this is, I guess, I'm not sure you're going to have an answer for this. This is probably more thought-provoking than anything. How safe is my job with AI?
Can you repeat that?
How safe is my job with AI? I guess they're asking, am I going to lose my job because of AI?
I think jobs are not going to be fully replaced unless but I think there's definitely going to be a shift in a need for embracing and using technology for doing your job. Like, I think that's going to be the shift. It's not like, you may have so many tools available and somebody's going to be able to come and do it at a much faster pace, more efficiently, but the way they're going to do it is through technology. So if we embrace the technologies that are coming out there and really move with it, I don't think it's going to fully eliminate, but I think there will be cases where some of the jobs will be eliminated. It depends on the roles and what they're doing, of course.
Okay, I'm safe then. I've got a few years to retirement, so maybe. Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Suma. Okay, we're getting there. Our next 2 speakers are from our tax exempt services group. And Garrett Higgins, who leads that group, will be here presenting, as well as Eva Maruk, who's a partner in that group. And they're going to give us an update on what the IRS is thinking about, things that they're going to be putting into place, and really more compliance than anything, right? As not-for-profit organizations would suspect, there's not much tax paying there, but there are those exceptions. So Garrett and Eva, please.
Thanks, Mark. So, Mark, whoever asked that last question about replacing, I thought the same thing. I thought about the toll booth collector. Remember, you used to drive through those toll booths, and where did all those guys go? I think they were actually retooled to issue the penalties for when you go through without an Easy Pass. So I think that's what would happen to our jobs. Similarly, I guess the advice I would have to anybody is maybe we should all be studying computer science going forward. Anyway, Mark, thank you. Today I'm here with Eva Maruk, who's a partner in our group. My name is Garrett Higgins. I'm the partner in charge of our exempt tax practice here at PKF O'Connor Davies. Let's see, do we have yes, there they are. All right, so today we're going to go over a couple of things, just some recent IRS pronouncements, tax court cases, other tax changes. We're going to talk about supporting organizations, donor advised funds. Those are some new regulations that have come out, final regulations. We're going to go into some tax exempt sectors, hospitals. That's been a hot focus by Congress recently. The educational institution area, sport leagues, believe it or not, also are making some headway. A few years ago, it was the NFL. Now it's the PGA, as well as some political activity. Eva is going to take us through. Obviously, we're coming to 2024. That's going to be a hot focus of nonprofits, what they can and cannot do, some court cases, some congressional bills that are trying to be passed to kind of perfect the election integrity. What else is on the IRS priority guidance plan that applies to organizations? Always beneficial to know what the IRS thoughts are, where their focus areas will be coming up in the future, and then how all this plays out in your organization. Some will apply, some may not apply, but either way, it's important to know. So moving on. So guidance for specifically for supporting organizations. So if you think about the speed of government, these regulations were proposed back in the Pension Protection Act of 2006. So the IRS finally issued final regulations, 2023. So that's takes a while for it to stew, and
get public opinion and stuff like that. So these regulations take place effective October 6th. And a couple important things to note about the final regulations is that they adopt the definition, first and foremost, of control. The definition of control of a supporting organization exists if one or more persons hold more than 50% of the or more of the voting power of the governing body, or the right to exercise veto power over the organization's governing actions. So it's not just looking at overlap. It's not looking at the board when you think about control of a supporting organization. It's more of, can I affect them in other ways too? So facts and circumstances certainly need to be taken into consideration. The final regulations also provided guidance on the prohibition of some gifts or contributions to type 1 and type 3 supporting organizations from individuals who control supporting organizations. So basically, if you think about it, there are 3 different types of, let's say, publicly supported organizations: the donative type that receive donations, the service type that provide program services and collect revenue from such activities. And then you have supporting organizations. The supporting organizations are organizations that do qualify for public charity status, that can receive maximum tax deductible donations, but don't have to meet a public support. So it's kind of a preferential. And there are 3 different types of supporting organizations: a type 1, which is like a parent sub; type 2, which is a brother sister; or type 3, which get into functionally integrated and non-functionally integrated. And that's kind of where the IRS feels that these types of organizations take advantage of. That's why they took so long to pass these regulations. But so they address the control factor. They addressed if an individual gives a gift to a type 1 or type 3 and they control it, they're going to limit the deduction for that. It also covers the responsiveness tests of these types of organizations, particularly the type 3 functionally integrated, because type 1 and 2 are kind of controlled, whether it's by a similar board or by a parent corporation. But type 3 gets into the type of organization that's technically not controlled by anybody, but yet could support various types of organizations. And type 3 non-functional integrated wants to make sure that they follow the rules and have to pay out a certain amount of money. So responsiveness test. The regs adopted several recommendations made in response to the 2016 proposed regs, including requiring supported organizations to respond to the needs and demands of each supported organization to satisfy the test. So they have to be responsive to those organizations. So there's those recommendations included in here. They give some examples. So they can fulfill these relationship requirements in different ways. Hold meetings, provide information, encourage communication to make sure its supporter organizations have a significant voice in the operations of the supporting organizations. That's what they wanted to make sure of. Another thing the final regs did is address the integral part test. So the final regs extensively covered the integral part test, which says type 3 supporting organizations must be significantly involved in the operations of one or more supported organizations and provide support that the supported organization depends on. Okay, so the final rule makes it clear that parents of integrated systems of supported organizations must direct the overall policies, programs, and activities of the supported organizations. Again, these are final tweaks to the regulations for supporting organizations. And again, I've seen through my career the use of support organizations when an organization can't meet the public support test before it's classified as a private foundation. They usually look to support organizations, either a type 1, type 2, or type 3. So if you have a structure or you have a system that has supporting organizations, you've got to make sure of these final regs and the requirements now that are codified in these final regs. Moving along, guidance for donor advised funds. So the proposed regs were issued on excise taxes, on taxable distributions made by sponsoring organizations from a donor advised fund and an agreement of certain fund managers to making these distributions. So donor advised funds are basically publicly supported organizations that receive contributions in which the donor's name is earmarked. So you can open a fund and it's the name of the donor, and then the donor has discretion on how that donor advised fund spends the money or invests the money. So these regs kind of codify a three-prong approach to defining what a DAF is. So a DAF is defined now as it must be separately identified by reference to the contributions of the donor. It must be owned and controlled by the sponsoring organization. And at least one donor or donor advisor must have the reasonable expectation of advisory privileges for the distribution or of investment of the distributions from the fund and investments. So that what the IRS considers is a true donor advised fund, which would make these regulations cover that type of entity. The proposed regs would provide that an excise tax equal to 20% of the amount of taxable distributions is imposed on each taxable distribution from a donor advised fund. So if I open a donor advised fund and I use that money or direct that money inappropriately for my use, private use, not going to charitable use, I could be subject to a 20% excise tax. The excise tax is also paid by the sponsoring organization of the DAF. Okay, that's who it's paid by. So these donor advised funds have to make sure they police the use of these funds. It's just not Garrett Higgins asked me to donate to this organization. I don't have to know anything about the organization. Now the sponsoring organization of this DAF has to take an active interest to make sure that it's the right type of entity, that it's for charitable purposes, etc. So these final regs kind of codify how what a donor advised fund is and how they should act, and penalties. There's also penalties on the managers of these DAFs if they knowingly approve an inappropriate. So that also is 5% of the amount of the inappropriate funding, up to amount of $10,000. So there's a lot at stake here if you're a donor advised fund, but these rules kind of lay out the rules of the road. The law lays out the rules of the road for them to operate. Moving along, hospitals have been in the press a lot in 2023, and basically Congress overall assessment is that the IRS must do more to ensure nonprofit hospitals provide sufficient community benefit to justify their exempt status. In some states, hospitals are for-profit. In some states, hospitals are nonprofit. But when you look at both of them, if you didn't know if they were for-profit or nonprofit, they operate the same. They still collect Medicaid, Medicare, provide medical services, private pay, etc. So you really couldn't tell. So what the IRS is saying is, well, why should they have a tax-exempt status? And they did this years ago when they came out with 501R, which came up with all these statistics. On the 990, they have this elaborate Schedule H, which provides a lot of information. But basically, the Congress is saying is that, a bipartisan group, might I add, which is hard to find lately in Congress, they set up a commission, and they basically wanted to ramp up scrutiny of nonprofit organizations' charitable care spending, because they believe that they're not acting as charities. The one thing that makes a charitable entity or qualify for 501c3 status is that they meet certain requirements. Okay, benefit, community benefit. That's where they feel they lack. They feel that the benefit the hospitals are getting from not paying tax on their profits is greater than the benefit back to the community. And that's what's stuck in their craw. So just to give you some statistics, a review of tax documents from 16 nonprofit hospital chains, each which takes in more than $3 billion a year in revenue, revealed that 12 of the hospital systems out of the 16 dedicated less than 2% of the revenue to charity care. Okay. 86% of the nonprofit hospitals spent less on charity care than they received in tax benefits between the years 2011 to 2018. So this is the reason why they're questioning hospital benefits. So they're calling for revision of federal auditing standards over the concerns that hospitals abuse their tax-exempt status to avoid providing free and discounted care to communities and low-income populations. Examples raise serious concerns that nonprofit hospitals may not be fulfilling their required obligation to provide reduced or free care to their most vulnerable patients. Again, they're looking at the low-income community, and they feel they're not doing enough. And the IRS has implemented several governmental accountability office recommendations to help ensure exempt hospitals fulfill their community benefit obligations, including creating a process to identify hospitals at risk of noncompliance with the community benefit standard. The problem is that Schedule H provides such information the IRS is not equipped to really look into and they're not experts in the Medicare field, the billing collections. Some other reports, I think Bernie Sanders pointed out, is that compensation to CEOs of hospitals are a lot higher than the benefits being provided to the community. So these are the issues. This is why hospitals are in the crosshairs. There was a recent case we've been following is the Mayo Clinic case. And what the case really presented itself, Mayo Clinic is a medical institution, which now claims to be an educational institution. Educational institutions receive a lot of preferences. One of the areas educational institutions receive is unrelated business income. Most focused on debt finance. So typically when a nonprofit borrows money to invest in a property and rents that property, that percentage of debt finance is subject to unrelated business income tax. But there's an exception for educational institutions in which they do not have to pay unrelated business income on debt financed real property income. So what happens here is Mayo Clinic has a lot of debt finance property. They're collecting a lot of rental. And they said, well, I feel like being an educational institution today to avoid, and they have to go through and prove certain things. So to be an educational institution, your exempt purpose has to be mainly focused on providing education. Although you can provide other benefits, they have to be insubstantial part of what you do. The substantial part has to be in education. So the Mayo Clinic, the IRS felt that I think they paid the tax. Then Mayo Clinic asked for refunds back, claiming exemption under this education. They went to court and the IRS lost. So $11.5 million at stake here. The IRS is not giving up. So what the IRS is actually doing is challenging the court ruling to provide that technically this is not an educational institution because they don't provide enough of educational benefit, or they substantially provide other types of services. And that's what, that's where it currently stands right now. Higher ed, going into higher ed, two areas. Obviously, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, as we all know, created a 1.4% excise tax on the net investment income for private colleges and universities with more than 500 tuition-paying students and non-exempt assets worth at least $500,000. Non-exempt assets worth at least $500,000 per student. So if you did the math, if you had 500 students, that's $25 million, $250 million actually, in non-charitable use assets, basically investments. So this was called an endowment tax. So the educational institutions are still trying to escape this, trying to get it repealed. And right now it's still holding. But like I said, educational institutions tend to, out of all of the nonprofits, tend to get the most, but right now this is still holding. But they're trying to unravel this particular tax. It only applies to really a handful of colleges that have very large endowments currently. So it's those college and universities that are challenging. Employer provided assistance under 127, which is basically educational assistance. During COVID, the use of this was basically for your employees up to $5,250. they could take classes. It didn't have to further their job. It could be any type of other types of classes, and it could be paid by the employer, and it would be tax-free. But it was expanded to include student loan repayment, and that is set to expire in 2025. So we're going to see if this particular will be extended or will sunset. NIL collectives. I find this fascinating if you're into sports, because if you go onto YouTube and you look at all these sport student athletes who are capitalizing on their name, right? So there was years ago there was, well, why should the college be able to capitalize on a good student athlete's name? Why couldn't the student? So basically. Give you a little background. In 2021, the NCAA adopted an interim NIL policy, which is NIL stands for name, image, and likeness, permitting student athletes to be compensated for use of their name, image, and likeness. Since the adoption of the interim policy, basically boosters and fans have been setting up these NIL collectives, whether through existing 501c3s or creating NIL collectives that are 501c3. So basically, the idea behind it is that these entities collect charitable contributions to pay the student athlete to represent, and raise awareness for other charities. And the IRS looking at these saying, wait a second, we're not so sure this meets the requirements of 501c3. But because they raise awareness for other charitable causes, some of these applications got approved. Some of these are just programs of other 501c3 organizations. So the IRS issued recent guidance, and it's really, it's not a rev proc or anything, so it's really not binding, but the guidance basically addresses organizations that develop paid name, image, and likeness opportunities for college student athletes. The purpose of this IRS guidance was to outline that in many cases, these organizations or these programs are not charitable. So therefore, these organizations do not deserve 501c3 status. And the programs probably do not promote charitable activities within the organization. So the IRS outlines its concerns. They plan to formalize it in a revenue procedure. Basically, the paid NIL opportunities they provide for students, athletes, and the crux of the whole situation is that they provide they promote private interests rather than charitable interests. And that's why they feel it will not qualify. But it's something to look for because it's very, very popular. And it does. I mean, I think if there's that one gymnast, I believe she is from LSU, she's a millionaire already. She hasn't even finished college. So she's getting it through NIL collectives. This could be a way to funnel money to those student athletes, right? And get a charitable deduction while doing it. And the IRS is saying, wait a second, even if we issued 501c3 status, we're going to be re-looking at it, your organization, because they don't believe that the primary activity is really the promotion of charitable activities or charitable entities. Sports leagues, basically, the NFL recently gave back their tax-exempt status, and their tax-exempt status was, they were a 501c6. A 501c6, usually sport leagues qualified because they were promoting a common business interest. The NFL gave it back for reasons because they didn't want compensation disclosed. The IRS is basically saying any type of business league, sport association that was given exempt status, they're going to be looking at if they generate over $50 million in gross receipts, they're going to be looking to revoke their tax exempt status potentially. The NHL, the PGA Tour, Ladies PGA, these are all being scrutinized. I'm going to pass it over to Eva now. She's going to take us through political activity and donor disclosure.
Sit down here. Okay. So Garrett had spoken about 501c3s and C4s and a little bit about C6s and the sport leagues. And when we speak about political activity, we always look to that it's a 501c4 because C4s are the only type of entity that could conduct political activity, so as long as it is not its primary mission or activity. So when we speak about political activity, there's been legislation that contains several provisions to restrict oversight of tax-exempt entities by the IRS and other federal agencies in the area of political activity and donor disclosure. So there's this ACE Act, and it's not the same ACE Act that we heard about that relates to private foundations and to donor advised funds. This is American Confidence in Elections Act. And this is the most conservative election integrity bill that is being seriously considered in the House in over 20 years. So most of the provisions relate to election law, but there are some that relate directly to tax-exempt organizations. And it is to this act is aimed to protect donor privacy and prohibit the IRS from asking not-for-profits for their donor list. So basically, these groups are asking for the IRS to back off. There's also the Don't Weaponize the IRS Act, and that bill is to prevent the IRS from being used as a political weapon against conservative not-for-profit groups. As we may recall, back in 2010 and maybe through 2013, the IRS inappropriately was holding up exemption applications of Tea Party groups and other conservative organizations. So they're trying to prevent that from all happening all over again. In these acts, there are two very popular Supreme Court cases, the NAACP versus Alabama and the Americans for Prosperity Foundation versus Bonta. That was a California court case, actually, that we closely followed. The plaintiffs there argued that the California regulations violated the First Amendment. So these court cases had everything to do with donor disclosure, not disclosing donors on the 990. This 990 for C4s right now do not disclose donor contributions and donors, as opposed to what we see on C3s where we do and we're required to. It's all about First Amendment rights. The other area here is also defining limits of 501c4 organizations. So like I said, C4s are able to conduct political activity, so as long as it's not their mission. These acts are trying to prohibit the IRS and the Treasury from issuing guidance relating to whether an organization is operated exclusively for social welfare purposes. So moving on. Substantiation of cryptocurrency charitable donations. So the IRS is trying to get its arms around this new world of cryptocurrency. I'm only going to be covering the charitable deductibility under Code Section 170. So the IRS released a Chief Counsel memorandum that sheds some light on the valuation of digital assets. So one, if cryptocurrency is considered property, let's just it comes to a shock to many, but it is considered property. And the memorandum provided guidance on donations of cryptocurrency over 5,000 must be substantiated by a qualified appraisal. So don't want that donation to be denied when you find out that you needed that qualified appraisal to have been conducted. Also, relying on the value by a cryptocurrency exchange without obtaining that appraisal will disqualify the charitable deduction. Reasonable cause will not apply. Just one or two other things on FBARs, because that's something also whether cryptocurrency, if an organization has a foreign account and whether it needs to be reported on the FBAR. So guidance has been provided on that, and it states that cryptocurrency could be excluded if it's held in a foreign account, only if that's the only asset in the foreign account. But if it's in combination with other assets, like a hybrid type of account, then those are included and reportable on the FR. And last, again, the IRS is still trying to get a handle on the crypto world, and it is using artificial intelligence to focus audit efforts, but also target individuals. So individuals who show acquisition or significant trading of cryptocurrency or other digital assets. So they're targeting those individuals.
We're almost out of time. I think we are out of time. We're officially in overtime.
I'll try to be. Garrett took up most of my time, no? Okay, so clean energy tax incentives. There is the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 unlocked many new cash benefits for tax-exempt entities to monetize clean energy credits through cash refunds when they invest in projects. For example, like roof solar systems. So normally you could be eligible for 30% credit, but cannot benefit from a credit not-for-profits because they don't pay no tax. So it's a cash refund. So the IRS introduced the direct pay, also known as elective pay, where a tax-exempt entity could receive a direct payment from the IRS. You know, only certain qualified entities qualify. The property has to be placed in service after January 1 of 2023. The credit ranges from 30 to 50%, and it's claimed on the 990T along with the form 3800. But there's a certain process. You need to set up a profile with the IRS, register, get a registration number for the project. And you know, that's designed to prevent fraud and abuse. So something that is good for the not-for-profits here to look at and pursue. And moving on, so I'll skim through the next sections because this has to do with IRS hot topics that are on the IRS priority plan for the in the future. So the IRS TEGE Division of Staffing, as we know, the Inflation Reduction Act gave a lot of funding to the IRS. Not all of it was given to the tax-exempt sector, but as we see, the IRS did hire additional staff. Yeah, anticipating to hire more. They are moving along with the closing out examinations and determination and granting exemption status to new tax-exempt entities. They're moving along within a 3-month period on general, so faster than it was before. You know, the IRS is big on technology these days with, you know, selecting audits, using technology to focus on audit efforts. So on the next slide here, I'm going to speak about a little bit about the areas that the IRS is focused on. So inconsistent or incomplete returns, why it's so important to file accurate returns, not have any omissions of schedules. Internal Revenue Code Section 501R, compliance for hospitals. So here, you know, the IRS is looking at the community health and needs assessment, whether there's, you know, financial assistance and emergency medical care policies in place and so forth. A lot of the examinations are random, but there are a lot of them are by referrals. The IRS issued statistics on how it, you know, how it chooses entities for audits, and referrals is big out there. IRS-wide examination initiatives, data matching, Form W-2s and 1099s, they cross-match, refund or abatement claim verification. So if there's a large refund claim, or ERC, we had one with an NOL, net operating loss carryback. That goes into a special IRS unit. They just don't give you the money up front. Over 1 million compensation and no filing up to 4720. That has to do with executive compensation reporting. Failure to file no 990T for any given year. Large or unusual questionable items. They red flag when you file the 990. They have something in the system that says, this doesn't look right. Let's pick this one up for audit. Foreign activities. This could be grant making, but this could also be program activities, having your, the boots on the ground. ERC. IRS hot topics to watch. So for-profit successors. The IRS here is looking whether who was the predecessor, how was the transfer of assets? Is there still a continuing relationship with this for-profit successor? And the IRS here is looking at if it results in any benefit to private shareholders or any persons associated with that predecessor. Private benefit annulment. So private annulment is stuck in the 501c code where it says you can't be a 501c3 without having net earnings, and nor you can't have your net earnings inured to the benefit of private individuals. So this is the death of a not-for-profit by having private annulment, even private benefit. 501c C7s, the country clubs. The IRS here is looking at the non-member income. Could that result in UBIT? Hospital organizations with UBIT, worker classification. I always say it's worker misclassification, because the IRS here is looking at employee versus independent contractors. Small exempt organizations that sponsor retirement plan, Form 990N filers, gross receipt models. The IRS is looking at other resources out there to try to connect the dots to see if the organization really is that small. Also, the small 990N filers need to be meeting an operational and an organizational test. They can't be inactive and dormant. And then the excise tax on the excess compensation, what we spoke about, and 509A3 supporting organizations cannot be filing a 990N. So the IRS is looking at that. IRS priority list. So the 512A6 had to do with the silo rules on separating unrelated business, trade or businesses. The IRS is going to be revisiting this. I think it was on the priority list last year and the year before. They're moving it up again on giving guidance on the allocation of expenses. Group exemption letters is out there, and section 119 and 132 regarding employer provided meals, the on-premises meals, and whether a lunch is really free. And last is the Tax First Act provision, and the IRS has moved into, it's leveraging technology and expanding, the paperless submission. It's moving all of its filings to e-filing, and that's all on my side.
Okay. That certainly was a lot to absorb there. And Eva and Garrett, we thank you for that. And it sounds like you need your own separate hours or so to present all this. Quite a bit of information.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks again. Folks, virtually, hang in there with us, please. We've got one more special guest speaker here, and we're looking forward to hearing from Amara Sedradine. And Amara Sedradine is a founding partner of Sedradine and Wariske LLP. Sedradine and Wariske is a boutique law firm specializing in services for not-for-profit and exempt organizations. Amara represents and counsels a wide variety of organizations, including both public charities and private foundations, as well as mission-driven for-profit businesses at all stages of development and operation. She provides comprehensive legal counsel and strategic guidance to her clients, advising on a wide range of tax, regulatory, governance, employment, and general corporate and transactional matters. So here to give us a legal update, please welcome Amara Sedradine.
Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you this morning. Thanks to Mark and PKFOD for the invitation and for staying with us. I hope we don't go into overtime, but I may ask for a few more minutes. I'm not sure how that works with the webverse out there. But in any case, my name is Amara Sedradine, as Mark mentioned, and just under a decade ago, I founded with my colleague Susan Wariski a boutique law practice that focuses exclusively on nonprofit organizations and mission-driven businesses. A decade before that, when I started my career in the not-for-profit law sector, the first accounting firm I ever worked with across client matters was O'Connor Davies. This was back in the early aughts, before the PKF was added to the name. And they were then, as they remain now, the preeminent accounting experts in the nonprofit sector. So it's really an honor for me to be here today at their invitation as the invited legal expert to present this session on legal developments affecting nonprofits over the course of 2023. A lot has happened this year. I have less than 25 minutes with you right now, and it's really my fault because I came a few minutes late this morning. But I have 40 plus pages of slides to share with you. So I'm going to move through this all rather quickly. But you'll have the detail within the slides to go back to. And my contact information is on the final slide. You should please feel free to reach out with any questions whatsoever. Because there is so much information to present, I organized the slides thematically to make it easier to retain and refer back to your areas of interest. I'll be speaking first and only briefly about national developments in the sector before moving on to New York State specific developments, focusing on governance as well as employment law matters. Within the section on employment law updates, we'll progress through the material according to the employment life cycle, beginning with hiring and ending with separation. I hope to have a few minutes at the end to talk generally about what we have been able to divine about trends in enforcement. I'll skip the federal context there, since my colleagues presented a very thorough overview about the IRS matters under the IRS's jurisdiction. And I'll focus instead just on the trends that we're seeing here in New York. So if I can get this slide clicker to move, key themes, is that right? Okay. If I had to call it, and I'm kind of surprised that it wasn't mentioned here today, although it is definitely not an accounting matter, at least at this point in time, the most seismic development in the nonprofit sector that I would identify for this past year was the Supreme Court decision in Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard, and its companion case, Students for Fair Admission versus North Carolina. While anticipated for many years now, given the court's current composition, the decisions challenging race as a plus factor in the context of university admissions held that affirmative action based on race is unconstitutional. As noted on the slides, the outcome in these cases have precipitated legal challenges in other areas, a number brought by the same individuals who animated the Harvard and UNC cases. Affirmative action or race-conscious program or affirmative race-conscious programming, which I use to mean programs that aim to increase diversity, is under attack in circumstances well beyond the college admission context, including in diversity fellowship programs, as well as grant programs. This is an existential concern for today's charitable sector. And at this point in time, however, despite the attention being focused on it and the concern about the future direction, I will say that there is no clear application of the holding in SFFA to circumstances outside of the university admissions context. And I strongly advise clients against moving precipitously to limit or shift their program criteria to race-neutral grounds. for example, by using proxies for race instead of race-conscious terms, especially if you work with an organization that is forwardly race-conscious as part of their missions. The decision was narrow in its articulation, and while a full conversation around various legal arguments and strategies available in support of the legality of race-conscious programming is well beyond the time we have available today, I will say that I have a number of clients with race-specific programs that I am comfortable are fully defensible. So recognize the future trend, but for now, let's hold firm if this is important to you and to your organization. I also importantly want to highlight here today that the Supreme Court decision has not affected the standards for seeking or maintaining tax exemption or the legality of employer efforts to foster diverse and inclusive workforces. Happy to take questions around this subject matter in particular after this session. Moving on, moving back, okay. Fundraising, including California's AB 4088. Okay, I don't know if any of you are familiar with AB 488. It's another matter that has absorbed quite a bit of my firm's attention over this past year. As we know, where California goes, so goes the nation. And California AG's office this year defined and enacted regulation concerning a new type of charitable entity called a charitable fundraising platform. Charitable fundraising platforms are websites that raise funds for charities. They may or may not be charities themselves. And any such entities that raise funds from California sources are now required to register as such with the California AG's office and to meet various compliance, disclosure, and reporting requirements. Given the size of California's population, the most populous state in the country, this law has significant implications for the practices of a number of well-known players in the charitable giving field nationwide. The law went partially into effect in January of this year, with the remainder postponed until final regulations are issued. If you're interested in the subject matter, California just issued further proposed regulations a couple of weeks ago, with the comment period open until January 2nd of 2024. Overall, the law is oriented to making sure platforms clearly disclose to donors how their funds will be remitted to the ultimate charitable recipient. The most problematic aspect seems to concern the practical challenges involved in obtaining those charities' consents to fundraise on their behalf. I'll just say on this subject matter, these platforms do a lot of good and raise a lot of funding for the charitable sector. Attaching significant administrative burden to their operations seems likely to diminish their ability to accomplish that greater goal. Happy to talk more about that as well. The third major development, and I'll talk about this only quickly because a lot of the developments here are quite technical, and my colleagues touched on it previously. But the third major development relates to the Treasury and IRS's issuance of proposed regulations regarding donor-advised funds. As with the supporting organization regulations, this is a development the sector has been eagerly awaiting for 16 years. Since donor-advised funds were first defined in the Internal Revenue Code back in 2006. Because we don't have much time and because the concerns are technical, I will only pause on this to say that to highlight the development and the egregious delinquency on the part of the IRS to take 16 years to provide guidance to the sector around such a major concern. And I will also highlight that these are only proposed regulations. So once comments are submitted and they are due January 16th of 2024, who knows how long we'll be waiting for the final regulations. I am going to skip the employee retention credit altogether because we had a very thorough presentation on this earlier and move on to governance updates. This I will pause on because it's a particular point of pride. Last year, Governor Hochul signed the Nonprofit Modernization Act, legislation I had the privilege of spearheading in my role as chair of the Government Relations Council at Nonprofit New York. And this legislation followed up on the Revitalization Act of 2014 to make a number of technical amendments to the New York Nonprofit Corporation Law. Importantly, in just the last month, Governor Hochul signed the last remaining item in that initiative, an amendment to NPCL Section 704A, which now allows non-membership corporations to authorize classification of their boards of directors in their bylaws. This was an efficiency that was previously reserved only to membership organizations. Few organizations were even aware, I'm sure, of this provision in the law, and there was widespread non-compliance. So this little fix now allows probably the majority of nonprofits represented in the audience today to move forward in good stead. So happy to have been able to be a part of that. I am going to turn now, and quickly, we can really pick up speed now, turning to major developments in the employment life cycle, beginning with new hires and onboarding. You probably all know that in the last year, New York now requires that job postings include a salary range. So this is a significant development. And I just want to highlight that it's true even for remote positions. We've talked a bit earlier today about automated employment or automated AI and automated employment decision tools. And I'll just repeat what I had said in an earlier presentation, which is now if you use any sort of automated employment tool to help review resumes that you receive in connection with a job posting, you must conduct an annual audit on that tool to ensure that it isn't inadvertently introducing bias into your resume review process, and to post those results publicly on the website. This is already in effect as of this summer. Protected class expansions, you're hiring. We have now made explicit what we all really knew and observed beforehand, I would hope, which is that you cannot make any employment decision based on somebody's height or weight unless it has to do with an essential element of performing the job. You've now made the hire. You haven't made that hire based on any discriminatory conduct or in any case. So you're bringing the person on board. You want to sign an offer letter. You just need to review your offer letter. If you have a provision that relates to assignment of employee eventions, you want to review that offer letter to make sure that provision is not overly broad and that you're not claiming rights to any inventions developed on the employee's own time using their own property. I-9 updates. Okay, they've joined, they've signed the offer letter. It's early days. You have 3 days to verify their employment eligibility. There's a new form I-9, so access that and download it. There's been a change in practice. During the pandemic, employers were allowed to verify forms I-9 remotely. That is no longer the case. As of August 30th of this year, employers who had hired employees remotely and thus conducted their employment eligibility review remotely were required to conduct those reviews again and in person unless the employer has signed up to participate in the federal E-Verify system. Payroll changes. How are we doing on time? Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, so just be aware, as you know, over the last number of years, the exempt salary threshold has increased steadily. It's held steady for a bit now at $58,500 here in New York City. There is a proposal to increase that salary threshold to $62,400. It hasn't been advanced yet, but it's something to keep your eye on, especially with costs generally increasing across the spectrum of nonprofit operations. Relatedly, it is now defined as criminal larceny for employers to engage in wage theft. This is the underpayment of entitled wages such as overtime. Not a huge, I would imagine that the enforcement priorities in this area will be focused on egregious bad actors, but this is a just opportune moment to review your employment classification process. Here's a nice thing. So employers that offer matching retirement contributions to employees who contribute to their 401k or 403b plan will soon be able to, and this is beginning in January 1st, 2024, they will soon be able to match contributions that employees make to pay off their student loans. Just a really, I think, nice and elegant way that public policy can catch up with the realities facing young Americans. Okay, I'll skip this. This is really the accountant's domain anyway. New Jersey has introduced a convenience of the employer rule. I'll just say if you are a New Jersey-based organization, reach out to your accountant to understand how the implications of this new law may affect your withholding practices. We have 3 slides on that. Okay, leaves very quickly. Some clarifications to who is eligible for New York's sick and safe time. Essentially, remote employees are not eligible. If they're wholly remote, if they are hybrid and come into New York occasionally, they are eligible, but only, if you want to be really sort of parsimonious about this, only for hours worked in New York City. Generally, I think a rule like that requires such administrative burden to be so narrowly parsed is not worth considering. It's not worth the administrative burden of figuring that out. So general rule of thumb, remote employees not subject to New York's paid sick and safe time requirements, but hybrid workers are. COVID leave is not behind us quite yet. Until January 1st of 2024, employees have up to 4 hours of paid leave to get their vaccinations. After January 1st, you are no longer required to provide that. But New York state employers, and there is no sunset on this provision, must still offer COVID-19 quarantine or isolation leave that is explicitly in addition to New York's other paid sick and safe time requirements. Paid family leave now covers siblings as well as, the historical family categories. So you should update your policies accordingly. Day-to-day operations. I'm going to skip this one. It's a little complicated. It's really focused on limiting the degree to which employers can attempt to prevent union activity. So basically, employers can't mandate that employees come into a room in order to hear the employer's views against unions. Also, employers may not require their employees to give them their passcode to access their personal social media accounts. It doesn't change the fact that an employer themselves can still review separately an employee's public social media account. Sexual harassment prevention policy. New York has a new form. Download it, implement it. Expanded lactation room requirements. You must now distribute lactation room policies upon hire annually and to employees who are returning to work post-birth. Separations, we might do it here. Okay, separation agreements. If you have a confidentiality clause, the NLRB now requires that these clauses be very narrowly tailored to meet the standard of libel, essentially making a knowingly false, non-disparagement clause, saying something knowingly false about the employer can be prohibited, but just general non-disparagement cannot. And this is only for non-supervisory employees. Notice of unemployment, you're now required to affirmatively distribute to employees a notice that they're entitled to unemployment benefits. I see Mark getting up, so I'm very quickly, he's just stretching. I'm very quickly going to touch on trends in enforcement, focusing, as I said, at the New York Attorney General level. Basically, Operation Bottom Feeder, which was New York State's well-publicized effort to root out sham charities, it has been successfully concluded. The AG's office hasn't articulated a defined sort of strategic agenda following that initiative, but what we can divine from the tea leaves and looking at the cases that are coming out of the Charities Bureau and the AG's office is that they are taking on high-profile cases that are focused on corporate governance, best practices, and internal controls, and using those cases as an example for the sector here in New York and nationwide. So I would say the focus is really on good corporate governance, internal controls, and compliance here in New York. And that's the year in a nutshell. Thank you so much. My contact information is right here. And again, please reach out with any questions.
Wow, thank you, Amara. That was great in such a short time, but I'm glad you left your information there. Just a reminder, folks, these slides will be presented or sent to you if you're participating virtually. They'll also be available on our website. For those in the room, as you're exiting, you can scan a QR code there that you see at the side there with your phone, and you'll have the slides available to you as well. So, but if you don't even do that, just visit our website. The slides will be available. Hopefully you benefited from these presentations this morning. I know there's a lot of information, and we're gonna have to sit down and just read those slides again, I'm sure. But if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out, contact us, go to our website. If you do have questions and they were submitted on the virtually, we will go through those, and we promise to get back to you and give you some responses. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Hopefully